Hey everybody, I'm reading The Secret of Platform 13, and the young prince has been taken by his three nurses to go to the Gump, and they're starting to want to go inside. "We can't go," said Lily, who was the careful one. "You know we can't." "Why can't we?" asked Rose. "We'd be up there in a minute. It's a good 2 hours before the closing." "What about the prince? There's no way we can leave him," said Lily. "No, of course we can't," said Violet. "We'll take him. He'll love going into a Swisserette, won't you, my poppet?" And indeed the prince crowed and smiled and looked as though he would like nothing better. Well, to cut a long story short, the three sisters made their way to the mouth of the cave, climbed into a wind basket, and in no time at all found themselves in King's Cross Station. Smells are odd things. They follow you about when you're not thinking about them. But when you put your nose to where they ought to be, they aren't there. The nurses wandered round the shabby streets, and to be honest, they were wishing they hadn't come. The pavements were dirty, passing cars splattered them with mud, and the Odeon cinema, where they'd seen such lovely films, had been turned into a bowling alley. Then suddenly there it was again, the smell, stronger than ever now, and beside an all-night garage they saw a shop blazing with light, and in the window a sign saying, "Frying Now." The nurses hurried forward. They stopped. "We can't take the prince into a common fish and chip shop," said Lily. "It wouldn't be proper." The others agreed. Some of the people queuing inside looked distinctly rough. "Look, you wait over there on the bench with the baby," said Rose. She was half an hour older than the others and often took the lead. "Violet and I will go in and get 3 packets. We're only a couple of streets away from the station, and there's plenty of time." So Lily went to sit on the bench, and Rose and Violet went in to join the queue. Of course, when they reached the counter, the cod had run out. Something always runs out when it's your turn. But the man went to fetch some more, and there was nothing to worry about. They had 3/4 of an hour before the closing of the Gump, and they were only 10 minutes' walk from the station. Lily, waiting on the bench, saw the big Rolls Royce draw up at the garage, saw the chauffeur get out, and a woman with wobbly piled-up hair opened the window and let out a stream of complaints. Then the chauffeur came back and started to rev up. "Oh dear, I do feel funny," thought Lily, and held on tight to the handle of the basket. Her head fell forward, and she jerked herself awake. Another cloud of fumes rolled towards her, and once more she blacked out, but only for a moment. Almost at once she came round, and all was well. The big car had gone, the basket was beside her, and now her sisters came out with 3 packets wrapped in newspaper. The smell was marvelous, and a greasy ooze had come on the face of the Prime Minister just the way she remembered it. Thoroughly pleased with themselves, the nurses hurried through the dark streets, reached platform 13, and entered the cloakroom. Only when they were safe in the tunnel did they unpack the steaming fish and chips. "It's okay to give him just 1 chip to suck," suggested Violet. But Lily, who was the fussy one, said no, and the prince had only healthy food and never anything salty or fried. He's sleeping so soundly," she said fondly. She bent over the cot, peered under the hood, unwound the embroidered blanket and lacy shawl, and then she began to scream. Instead of the warm, living, breathing baby, there lay a cold and lifeless doll. And the wall of the gentleman's cloakroom was moving. It was almost back into position. Weeping, clawing, howling, the nurses tried to hold it back. Too late. The Gump was closed, and no power on earth could open it again before time was up. But in Nanny Brown's little flat, Mrs. Trottle stood looking down at the stolen baby with triumph in her eyes. "Do you know what I'm going to do?" she said, and Nanny Brown shook her head. "I'm going right away from here with the baby to Switzerland for a whole year, and when I come back I'm going to pretend that I had him over there. It's my very own baby, not adopted, but mine. No one will guess. It's such a little baby. My husband won't guess either if I stay away. He's so busy with the bank, and he won't notice." Nanny Brown looked at her thunderstruck. "You'll never get away with it, Miss Lorana, never!" "Oh, yes, I will. I'm going to bring him back as my own little darling babykins, aren't I, my poppet? And I'm going to call him Raymond. Raymond Trottle. That sounds good, doesn't it? He's going to grow up like a little prince, and no one will be sorry for me or sneer at me because they think he's properly mine. I'll sack all the servants and get some new ones that can't tell tales. And when I come back, it'll be with my teeny weeny Raymond in my arms. You can't do it, said Nanny Brown obstinately. It's wicked. Oh, yes, I can. And you're going to give up your flat and come with me because I'm not going to change his nappies. And if you don't, I'll go to the police and tell them that it was you that stole the baby. You wouldn't, gasped Nanny Brown. But she knew perfectly well that Miss Trottle would. When she was a little girl, Larna Trottle had tipped 5 live goldfish onto the carpet and watched them flap themselves to death just because her mother had told her to clean out their bowl and she was capable of anything. But it wasn't just fear that made Nanny Brown go with Miss Trottle to Switzerland. It was the baby with his milky breath and the big eyes which he now opened to look about him and the funny little whistling noise he made. She wasn't particularly a nice woman, but she loved babies, and she knew that Larna Trottle was as fit to look after a young baby as a baboon. Actually, a lot less fit, because baboons, as it happens, make excellent mothers. So Mrs. Trottle went away to Switzerland, and over the island a kind of darkness fell. The queen all but died of grief. The king went about his work like a man twice his age. The people mourned, the mermaids wept on their rocks, and the schoolchildren made a gigantic calendar showing the number of days which had to pass before the gump opened once more and the prince could be brought back. But all of this, the boy called Raymond Huntington Trottle knew nothing of at all. Chapter 13. Odge Dribble was a hag. She was a very young one and a disappointment to her parents. The Gribbles lived in the north of the island and came from a long line of frightful and monstrous women who flapped and shrieked about, giving nightmares to people who had been wicked or making newts come out of the mouths of anyone who told a lie. Odge's oldest sister had a fingernail so long that you could dig the garden with it. The next girl had black hairs like piano wires coming out of her ears. The third had stripy feet, and so on, down to the sixth, who had blue teeth and a wart the size of a saucer on her chin. And then came Odge. There was great excitement before she was born, because Mrs. Gribble had herself been a 7th daughter, and now the new baby would be the 7th also, and the 7th daughter of a 7th daughter is supposed to be very special indeed. But when the baby came, everyone fell silent, and a cousin of Mrs. Gribble said, "Oh dear." The baby's fingernails were short. Not one whisker grew out of her ears. Her feet were absolutely ordinary. "She just looks like a small pink splodge," the cousin went on. So Mrs. Gribble decided not to call her new daughter Noctilia or Valpurgina, and settled for Odge, which rhymed with splodge, and hoped that she would improve as she grew older. And up to a point, Odge did get a little more hag-like. She had unequal eyes. The left one was green and the right one was brown. She had one blue tooth, but it was a molar right at the back, the kind you only see when you're at the dentist. There was also a bump on her feet, which could have just been the beginning of an extra toe, although not a very big one. Nothing is worse than knowing you have failed your parents. But Odge did not whinge or whine. She was a strong-willed little girl with a chin like a prize-fighter's and long black hair which she drew like a curtain when she didn't want to speak to anyone. And she was very independent. What she liked best was to wander along the seashore, making friends with the mist-makers and picking up the treasures that she found there. It was one of these lovely walks that she came across the nurse's cave. It was a big, dark cave with water dripping from the walls, and the noise that came from it made Odge's blood run cold. Dreadful moans, frightful wails, shuddering sobs. She stopped to listen, and after a while she heard that the wails had words to them, and that there seemed to be not one wailing voice, but 3. "Oh," she heard, "oh, I shall never forgive myself, never." "Never, never," wailed the second voice. "I deserve to die," moaned the third. Odge crossed the sandy bay and entered the cave. The three women were sitting there dressed in the uniform of nursery nurses. Their hair was plastered with ashes, their faces were smeared with mud, and they wailed and rocked. They speared pieces of completely burnt toast from a smoldering fire and put them into their mouths. "What's the matter?" asked Odge. "What's the matter?" said the first woman. Odge could see that she had red hair beneath the ashes and a long freckled nose. "What's the matter?" repeated the second one, who looked so much like the first that Odge realized it had to be her sister. "How is it that you don't know about our sorrow and our guilt?" said the third, and she too was so alike that Odge knew they must be triplets. Then Odge remembered who they were. The tragedy had happened before she was born, but even now the island was still in mourning. "Are you the nurses who took the prince up there and allowed him to be stolen?" "We are," said one of the women, and she turned furiously to her sister. "The toast is not burned enough, Lily. Go and burn it some more." Then Odge heard how they had to live in a cave ever since that dreadful day so as to punish themselves. How they only ate food that was burnt or moldy, so stale that it hurt their teeth, and never anything they were fond of like bananas. How they never cleaned their teeth or washed so that fleas could jump into their clothes and bite them, and always chose the sharpest stones to sleep on so that they woke up sore and bruised. "What happened to the prince after he was stolen?" asked Odge. She was much more interested in the stolen baby than in how bruised the nurses were or how disgusting their food was. "He was snatched by an evil woman named Mrs. Trottle and taken to her house." "How do you know that?" asked Odge. "If the door in the gump is closed." Hags do not start school until they're 8 years old, so she still has a lot to learn. "There are those who can pass through the gump even when it's shut, and they told us." Ghosts, do you mean? And we'll stop there for today. Thanks for listening. Bye, guys.